Hello, listeners, and welcome to the first of my podcast series, In This World, A Journey Through Life's Challenging Times. I hope that you will appreciate the time that we spend together, and I look forward to many times that we connect around the many issues that we've encountered through my own experiences and through yours as well. So people have asked me what brought me to this point to decide to start a podcast. And I think that at any time in our lives when we make an important decision, it's at a pivotal point where things have converged and we feel the need to make that decision. In my case, what brought me to starting this podcast really has to do with a milestone moment in my life that cannot be undone. And as so many of you have been impacted by this crisis, my one and only son, age 25, just weeks away from his 26th birthday, died from fentanyl poisoning from using opioid drugs. So I am still grieving this because, frankly, experiencing life without him makes living in this world unlike anything I could have imagined. And for those of you who've had this experience, whether it's a family member, a friend, a work associate, you understand what I mean in terms of learning to live without that person there in your life anymore. I will tell you that there will always be a place in me that misses him terribly. But I also know that I can fill some of that place with happy memories. And I know that some of you listening today can understand what I'm talking about. Because regardless of how loss happens, grief is something that we experience. And know that you are not alone. So here I am, 18 months later, and I feel very compelled to speak about this particular trial in my life, though it is not the first. And we will talk about other experiences that you can relate to and ways to cope with it and ways to learn to continue in this world. I will say that it is only by the grace of God that I'm able to share this 18 months later and have some peace about it. So I will share with you that part of that milestone decision-making process around starting a podcast really came from the prompting of God. Now, Jesus said, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. But take heart, because I have overcome this world. And these are words that Jesus spoke nearly 2,000 years ago, and they were true then, and they are true today. So I will tell you again, in this world, you will have trouble. It's not optional. It's not based on how good we are, or where we were born, or how much wealth we do or don't have. The fact is that universally, all people will have trouble because we live in a broken world. And this can be an uncomfortable truth. But instead, I actually find it comforting to know that we will all face trials and challenges, and to know that we are not alone and we can find the strength to endure life in this world. In fact, and this is important to hear, that Jesus has provided for us a way to have peace and strength and comfort, even in the midst of our trials. My hope is that you will gain that understanding and find some peace in every day, whether you're in a season of joy or a season of sorrow, of encouragement or disappointment, of fulfillment or doubt. And over the next series of episodes, we'll talk about loss and how to cope with loss and how to find peace along the way. And then through the rest of this podcast, we're going to talk about different challenges in life. Tough times that can happen really at any time in our lives and that many of you have experienced. So whether it's working with a difficult boss or dealing with bullies or divorce or losing your job or any kind of change, rejection, bankruptcy, I mean, there are just so many challenges, in this world. So as I said, in this world, we will have trials, but there is good news, and I'll be sharing it with you in every episode of this podcast. So please continue to join with me as we start this journey together. So for many of you who listen to podcasts on a regular basis, you may know that this is the first time that I am making a podcast recording. So this first episode may seem, a little bit of a novice trying to work through a process. I appreciate your patience. I appreciate your understanding as we go through this journey together and as I learn more as we go along. So let's talk about coping with loss. I will tell you that I couldn't have imagined that one day I would be sitting here having this conversation with you and sharing with you how difficult it has been, but yet how I have been able to get through and continue to live each and every day, finding joy and finding peace in the midst of my sorrow and my grief and my just missing my son. It is possible. I'm obviously proof that we can endure, and not just endure, but we can have a full life. It's a different life. Whenever we experience one of life's trials, when we go through tough times, we're never really the same once we come through the other side, or even in the process of going through it, it's changing us. And that's a good thing because that's how we grow. That's how we mature. That's how we get closer to God. That's how we learn to connect. If we lived our lives thinking that our life will only have goodness in it and that anything that comes other than that, we sort of ignore it and try to just push by it, we're missing something in that method of coping. I would call it a method of coping because I do think avoidance is a way of coping. Just don't think it's a very healthy one. So as we look at how things have been going for me, I think I have to go back to my first experience with loss. And that would go back to my childhood. My father passed away when I was 11 years old. He had cancer. And at that time, for bone marrow cancer, there was no treatment. He had taken chemo and radiation, nothing like what it is today. He had terrible pain, and my life was changed forever in that moment. But it was changed in a number of ways, and of course, the grief was terrible. And I just had this aching hole in my heart where my daddy should be. Even to this day, I miss him. I think he has impacted my life in so many ways, even though I was only 11 years old when he passed away. And I am so thankful that I did have that experience with him growing up, where he encouraged me, he respected me, he taught me, he listened to me. He was a good father. And at that time, in terms of coping with that loss, what I found was that God brings people into our lives and they help us through that part of our journey. And in this case, it was my teacher, Mrs. Petzold, who had not too recently, but fairly recently lost her husband in the Vietnam War. So she too had been grieving the loss of her husband. We somewhat amazingly looked very much alike. And sometimes teachers would walk up behind me thinking I was Mrs. Petzold, which was funny to both of us. But it was one more connection that we had. And I'm just so thankful that God brought her into my life to help me gain better understanding, but more than anything, to see someone else experience that kind of deep loss and yet show up every day and have many smiles and some tears and to just be present and be there for me. She showed me what that looks like so that I can do that today for you and for others. In addition to coping with loss through connecting with people who had similar or, experiences. And I think that is very important. I do know that sometimes we feel like we just need to be alone in it. And I think that's important too. But just remembering that while we're in those quiet times and just being with ourselves, we are truly never alone because God is always with us. His presence gives us peace. His presence gives us hope. His presence gives us comfort. So while you may feel alone, if you acknowledge that God is there, whether you acknowledge him or not, frankly, he is there. And so I learned that in those times I prayed. Didn't really understand who God was when I was 11 years old, not the way I do today. But I did believe that there was something bigger. And then one other way that impacted my life was that I cherished every moment with the people I cared about, wanted to live life every day and try to experience as much as I could, learn as much as I could, do as much as I could, because tomorrow isn't promised. And that's something to learn when you're 11 years old. And it did impact my life into my adult life, into every day of my life, even today. Tomorrow is not promised, and that is not to make us anxious, but that is to make us have an understanding that every minute is precious and time should not be wasted. And that reminds me of a watch that I bought for my son on his 18th birthday. We had gone shopping together. I wanted to get him something really special, something different. And we went into a couple jewelry stores, and he liked the idea of a watch. So I bought him this beautiful watch, and we took it to get it inscribed. And on the back, I wrote, "Time is precious. Do not waste it." Somewhat prophetic. Who would have thought? But it spoke to me of a really core or foundational principle on which I had lived my life that I wanted to share with my son, and that today I want to share with you, because time is precious. As I said, tomorrow isn't promised. It's not promised to me. It's not promised to my loved ones. It's not promised to you or your loved ones. Every single day is a gift. And I know that there are days where it doesn't feel that way. And that sometimes we get frustrated with people and they get frustrated with us. But truly, if we step back and just remember that every day is a gift, that our time together is a blessing, and that while every day life sometimes makes us feel like we take it for granted, the truth is we should never take it for granted. So, because I wrap up this first episode, we can recap. In coping with loss, in trying to get through this particular trial, there are a few things that we discussed. The first being that, grief is real. It does impact us, and it has a lifelong impact. The second is to grieve with other people or find connections with other people who have experienced what you're going through, or maybe are in the midst of it now. The third is that it is important to find some time alone as well, but just to remember that you're never alone. God is always with you. And the fourth is just to remember that time is precious and that tomorrow isn't promised. And we should really take advantage of the fact that we're here to experience life, to live life, and we should do it to the fullest. So God bless you. Thank you for taking this time to be with me today. And I look forward to joining with you again in our next podcast.